This is your fortnightly instalment where I interview a trailblazing physiotherapist that has shaped the profession we are today. In celebrating their journey, knowledge and insights, you gain the opportunity to plan and guide your own professional journey. My name is Doug Carey and welcome to Physio+10. Welcome you and previous listeners to Physio+10. Thanks for joining us again today. Special guest today on the podcast is Nick Schuster. Welcome, Nick.
Doug, thank you very much for inviting me. I love doing things like this, so thank you so much.
That's cool. Hey, can we start with a bit of background, like where you grew up and what your early schooling entailed?
Yeah, so I'm a 40-year-old guy from a town in Queensland, Australia called Toowoomba, which is called the gateway to the Golden West. So I'd say I moved around a bit, but grew up there. Grew up pretty poor, like a lot of people did in the 80s, and my parents were quite educated, scrimped and saved to send me to the best schools and help me realise an opportunity. And I moved to Brisbane to study physiotherapy in the year 2000. And Doug and I will obviously go into the rest of my story, and I've basically been pretty settled around the northern Bayside part of Brisbane since then, in this beautiful peninsula called Redcliffe. So I'd say that's where I'm from, Doug. This year we get our own NRL team with Wayne Bennett as the coach, so we're now on the map. But for you guys in Perth, you're AFL, so
You're talking a foreign language.
Exactly. Some of your East Coast Australians will identify with that. So
now, were either of your parents in the health sphere?
So both of my parents were, university PhD educated, and they were actually in my dad was agricultural science and my mum was a marine biologist. But when I sort of trace back my family in health, my grandfather, who died the year before I was born, ran a small country town optometry clinic. And my grandmother was probably my greatest influence growing up, and she saw a lot of him in me. And the funniest story that I'll tell is that, this was, post World War II, and a lot of people couldn't afford the services, Doug, and he was often paid in chickens, would you believe? Chickens were like the currency back then for optometry services. So I got one throwback, but it's very specific. It's a small town allied health. So maybe that's where it's from.
And where do you fall in the family structure, kid-wise?
Okay, oldest of four boys. So what's that say about me psychologically? The weight of expectation, the high achiever. I was probably a bit of a pain in the ass to the brothers below me. I didn't really know how to talk to women because I was one of four boys. So very, very male-dominated household, and the oldest. So yeah, very fun upbringing. But yeah, I can see that I would have given my brothers a bit of hell, mate. So.
And I'm guessing your mother as well.
Oh yeah, my mother was a saint. So but my brothers and I all turned out really well. So big credit to her for raising us. And again, educated woman taking 12 years off her career. Like, how many people these days would be prepared to do that?
Yeah, actually sounds pretty awesome. And particularly she's got a PhD as well.
100%.
So how was it you got interested in physio? I mean, the long arm of your grandfather reaching from the grave seems a bit long. So what was it that got you there?
Okay, so my early life until age 5 was in Canberra, Doug, and I had very bad asthma. So those of you who know Canberra, it's one of the coldest places in Australia, very dry, not good for asthma. So I probably spent about a third of my life in a large hospital in Canberra. And I think that, as a kid at that age, like, to not be able to breathe, like, is pretty distressing. And I had no issues once we moved. But I remember back to some of my hospital experiences, and I think that it's almost like I felt safe in the hospital, Doug. So like, I think back to being in hospital, being admitted, and like, I remember one school term, I was in hospital for freaking 8 weeks out of a 10-week term. And I suppose my memories of it aren't that good because I was very young. But yeah, it just felt safe, felt confidence with, people in the health system, that they were keeping me alive and, looking after me. And I think, that they say that a good part of your belief system is built before age 6. And, that's probably what I actually would trace it back to at a first, first memories.
Yeah. Okay. So quite embedding in that sort of sense. Was it physio that stood out for you, or was it like, did you dabble with medicine, or how'd you get to physio?
So that's a great question. So I'll take you through a bit of my schooling. So I was a very distractible child, and I had what was called ADD then, attention deficit disorder. So, the way that my parents directed me was into sport and music and academia, so I wasn't off roaming the streets. And in high school, so I went to this really varied high school that had, we had a good academic record, but we were the best at rugby, and we had a cattle stud, and we had army cadets. It was a very traditional school, Doug. Would you believe the girls still did deportment and typing and things like that? So real country school. And my strengths were always the maths and sciences. And I did that because I figured I wanted to get the best results at school. And if I got the right answer, there was no subjectivity. So I veered away from English and biology and those things. Now, in the 90s, it was very, very hard to get into medicine, and the government made some structural changes that made it almost unachievable. And I think Tony Abbott was the health minister of the time. I had a very good doctor, and I was very friendly with him, and he gave me all his old textbooks when I was in grade 9 or 10, and it was medicine that I wanted. But I was a pragmatist. Growing up poor, Doug, like I wasn't prepared to put my family through the hardship of having to get a science degree, then go on to do medicine. It was too long a path. And in Queensland, there was this thing called QTAC, which is like your tertiary entry preferences, Doug. And I had chose engineering and business because I was a very process-driven thinker. I was like, okay, engineering, it follows all the stuff I did in school. And business, I liked, the thing I liked about business was the ability to make your own luck, really, and to not follow someone else's path for you. And I just had this sneaking feeling about a day before this thing was due. I was like, I can't get into medicine. I've chosen engineering and business. And pardon me for saying it, I was like, fuck it, I'm going to choose physio, because I looked at all of the courses I could choose. There were very few people doing it, and there was a very high entry score. And I must admit, it was probably the fact I couldn't get into medicine, but I still wanted to help people, and I wanted to make an impact in health. And honestly, the prestige. It's like this thing, you needed the top entry result. There was only physio and dentistry that needed that at the time. I'm like, screw it. This thing's probably as good as medicine. I'm helping people. I hope it's process driven, and we'll go to this in a sec because that's what I was good at. So I chose physio. It was a confused choice, but looking back, and a lot of what I do in my life now, I made the right choice. I'm not an engineer. So that was, crazy story, Doug.
And just touching back on something that you asked, or you mentioned that you weren't very good at speaking with girls.
Yeah.
When you rocked up to that first day at physio, what was the balance of male to female in that first year?
Funny. That's funny. Well, I remember looking at some of the old photos, around they got the graduation photos from like the 60s and the 70s. And I think in the 70s, the first bloke was in physio at University of Queensland in Brisbane. And I'd say the split was 2/3 females, 1/3 males, still strongly female dominant. I think it's just more female dominated than male today. But yeah, I looked at the people there, and guess what I felt even in the first week? I felt like I was out of place. I really did. I thought, I didn't think, what have I done? But I thought, is this me? Because, my early university experience, which was very formative for me, I went to a college. Now, some of your listeners will have gone to a college. College is fun, and you do a lot of cool stuff. And admittedly, there's a lot of drinking. And most of my friends at college were engineers, lawyers, couple did dentistry, couple did optometry. I was the only physio. So it was not a crisis of confidence, but I was like, oh, none of my mates are doing what I'm doing. It was a strange feeling, Doug.
So you went to UQ,
I did.
and what were your big experiences for you at university that sort of have stuck with you going forward?
Yeah, so UQ is a 4-year degree, Bachelor of Physiotherapy. I went there from 2000 till 2003. Now, universities have eras, and I went to UQ in the TA deep neck flexors era. So in my first year, I enjoyed the varied nature of the course. And when I look back at the subjects that were probably most vivid to me, Doug, it was actually the psychology. It was the entry to psychology subjects that really got me intrigued. And, I suppose physiotherapy has evolved from the body to the body and the brain to potentially the brain more than the body. And I think that I could even see at that stage that psychology had more importance and weighting than what it was probably given in our course. I remember very vividly a microbiology lecture where the lecturer spent 50 minutes teaching us to wash our hands, and I almost quit the degree on that day. But that woman was a genius because she somehow predicted what we need to do during COVID. So the first year I really loved. The second couple of years, I struggled because I was a process-driven person, and I really did struggle with the anatomy, and I severely struggled with the neuroanatomy in second year. I remember going into pracs, and I'm a kinesthetic learner, and there was pins in brains, and I was like, oh God, I'm not going to remember what tract that was. I remember my first anatomy exam in first year, Doug, there was 450 multi-choice questions. I knew 250 and I guessed 200 of them, and I just passed the exam. So the first couple of years, while being open to different elements of the health education system, the switch from process-driven learning to content-driven learning was a real stretch for me. It was really hard. But once things became kinesthetic again, like I really enjoyed the musculoskeletal physiotherapy pracs. I remember I hated cardiothoracics in third year. It was the only subject I ever failed, and I had to do a supplementary test for it. And it was almost like 2/3 of our cohort hated cardiothoracics. So that was confirmed to me during my prac year. So do you want me to go into the final year, Doug, the prac year?
It sounds like it was your make or break year.
Absolutely. And that's where I stepped up because, again, it's all kinesthetic. You're doing stuff. So I think that I was one of these people that I wanted this accelerated journey. And I had a really great prac year. So I had a Burns unit placement. I had a uni clinic placement for Musk. We had some really high level lecturers who then became, heads of school of these other physio universities in Queensland as they popped up, because UQ was the first and only one at my stage. So I had some really great musculoskeletal placements, which was the direction I knew I wanted to head. And I had some placements in cardiothoracic and rehab that confirmed my bias towards Musk, that I didn't want to head in those directions. So I think what I can say about my uni education, which was varied, I felt like I got a bit too much TA and deep neck flexors in third year, but that was probably all of us. And I did, however, feel that we were very well prepared for the workforce at the end, Doug, with a full year of prac, 8 prac placements, variety, real patients. And at our uni clinic, patients had to pay. I think they had to pay like $20 for an appointment. So that was really good for me because I was starting to associate my need to provide value for a patient. They weren't coming for free like in the outpatient system in the hospital, and I had to really give them good value in whatever way I felt like I could at the time. So I felt like we were very well prepared, Doug, back in those days.
Yeah, that's good. It's that payment's an interesting point, because I think that's one of the things that, I'm not sure if threatening is the word, but when new grads come into a private practice arena, they suddenly get that realization that they're sitting down with a person not only to help them, but there is going to be a financial transaction, and that can put pressure on them, in addition to trying to do a good subjective and a good objective and provide some sort of meaningful treatment at the same time. So it's a good thing to be aware of.
I think so too, Doug. And we've in the group that I run for private practice clinic owners and physios, we've spoken about this many times over the years. And for younger physios, I'm not sure about your prac year, Doug, but in mine, I couldn't have a job because I had to work 40 hours a week. And I worked as a gardener at the uni for 3 months before I started prac to save up enough money to live for the year. So I've thought about this long and hard, and I've written this in one of my books. It's the poorest year of your life as a semi-adult in your final prac year, and you take the beliefs that you develop during that year and you project them, at least for the first couple of years, onto your clients in your first couple of years of work. So the way that our final year and first year is designed can be quite mentally challenging from that providing value and taking people's money for a provision of a service type of perspective. So yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying, and I hadn't really put it into words before, but I think you're saying is that we graduate as a fully qualified, remunerated physio, but we're thinking still like a student.
100%. And like, put this way, how long have you been doing this, Doug, and how long have I been doing it? I'd speculate that both of us still have some, high school level beliefs holding us back in certain areas. So like, with a lot of mentoring under my belt of young therapists, the first step is for them to just know that they might be thinking like this. You don't have to change it, just be aware of it and don't sort of put it in the back of your brain and pretend it's not happening. So yeah, it's tough. Like I'd say that in systems like, doctor world, where they're residents up to registrars, they're working in a system where people don't have to pay, like it's possibly a bit easier for them. I think other professions have nailed it better than ours, like pharmacists with their internship year. If I could flick one switch, Doug, in the uni system, it'd be a parting of ways in third year for Musk versus non-Musk, and then an internship year the first year you get out. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Or something similar.
That with the rainbow and the pot of gold at the same time. So look, once you graduated, I find this interesting. Like you've gone, what do you decide to do now that you've graduated? You know you're going to Musk.
Yeah.
But what were the key decisions that you made to further that pathway for yourself?
You're going to love this. You might not have heard this story before. Some who know me will. It's pretty nuts. Okay, so I remember doing what everyone did about 3/4 of the way through the prac year, which was applying for the hospital jobs. It was like the jobs that were seen to be the best jobs. And so I applied and I got an interview, and I did my selection criteria, and I got into the interview. And in the interview, the people asked me the same questions as I'd filled out in the selection criteria. And it just blew my mind. I'm like, what is this all about? Why are you asking me the same stuff? I actually walked out of the interview and I'm like, hospital's not for me. After I walked out of the interview, my head was spinning, Doug, and I was at uni. Get this, there was a flyer. The flyer was in the on the notice board. And it was one of those ones with the little dog ears that you take. And it said clinic for sale. And the price of it was, I think it was $7,500. And I was intrigued by it. I'm like, clinic for sale. I don't know anything, but somehow this opportunity, it just grabbed me, Doug. It just grabbed hold of me. And I didn't take the dog ear. I was a bit of a bastard. I took the whole flyer. And
out the competition.
I just took. Well, I think at that time I decided that I was just going to go all in on this. And what happened was I drove up and I met the owner. This was a lady named Donna. So Donna had run this clinic for a couple of years. She only worked a couple of days a week because she had this desperate desire to get back into the uni education system. And it was almost like a straight swap. I wanted to get out and make my way, and she wanted to get into the education system. So she had a few different people who wanted the clinic, and they had to be it was in a medical center. So you had to be interviewed by the doctor who owned the medical center, and she got to choose who got it. And she chose me because I reminded her of her son. So at that time I was like, I'm going to make a go of this. And it was so interesting, Doug, because it was probably the most amazing drinking from a fire hose moment for someone who got out there. And you know how capable you are in your first year. You can hold down a conversation with people, but my God, you know nothing. And, at the time you're on the peak of the Dunning-Kruger effects curve where you think you know everything. And I thought, bugger it, I'm gonna grow this business and I'm gonna get a great reputation in this area and give clients maybe what they might have been lacking, which I was able to work out over the next couple of years. And yeah, that was probably the biggest decision I've ever made in my career, the riskiest one, but yeah, it's paid off.
Yeah, that's I didn't know that. That's pretty ballsy.
Well, my parents had also divorced that year, so neither of them had any money, and I went and got an unsecured loan for the money, and I'm like, screw this, I'm just going to give it a crack. Medfin. Can't thank Medfin enough. Any of you guys who are looking to borrow to start your own clinics, they supported me. They give health professionals extra benefits than they would if you're a non-health professional because you're deemed less risky. So this was about as risky as I could have been, but yeah, it worked.
Yeah. Okay. So what happened then? Like you literally moved in, you got to practice everyone's dream. When did the reality actually hit you that you had this not only clinical challenge, but you had a business challenge as well.
Yeah. So what happened was I was able to extract a good amount that I've learned. Like even things like I did accounting in school. Like I was able to draw from things I'd learnt from family members and in school for the business side of things initially. Clinically, I was floundering. Like I can hold down a conversation with anyone. So like it's interesting. What we often discuss, Doug, what makes a good physio, and I suppose now you'd call it therapeutic alliance. And I probably, my diagnostic skills and the treatment tools available to me, I needed to sort of step up pretty quickly through, fairly significant amounts of external courses. And even though the internet wasn't as accessible and in 2004 as it is now, so I sort of sweated on every mailed out issue of In Motion where it had the PD section at the back with all the courses. And I probably would do 4 or 5 of those courses a year to upskill myself clinically. But strangely, Doug, I didn't find the business side hard. It sort of unlocked a part of me that was probably locked during my physio degree. And, I would do my accounting and my invoicing and things like that on a Saturday afternoon before I'd go home to my mates where I was still in the share house, and we'd have a few drinks. But the biggest step I made, Doug, was after about 6 months, I bought my first house and I moved away from my buddies up to this area by myself. I was like, no, I'm all in on this, and I love the area. So probably only took me 3 months to get a full caseload. But then my biggest regret is I really did nothing with the business for about 5 years until I was forced out of my premises. So back then in the early 2000s, it was sort of fairly widely accepted for business-minded people that, if you bought houses and you bought shares, you were going to be a millionaire. So I started doing that, but then a little thing came along called the GFC. And I had some interesting experiences there, Doug, where I'd almost paid my first house off and I had some assets. I was only 25. I was doing good. And I met someone from an investment company that turned out to be one of Australia's biggest scams, called Storm Financial. So these guys get you to borrow against your house and take out a margin loan on top of that. Some of you know what that is. It's just basically unsecured debt. And then the stock market halved in the GFC. So I went from a guy who thought I was going to make my way through property and shares to, everything I've worked for the last 5 years is gone. Now that flicked another switch in me, Doug, which was I wanted to go all in on learning about business. I became very skeptical of investing, of property and shares, because I didn't have control over it. I thought, what's the one thing I've got control of, which is my business education, and that started in earnest just around the time of the GFC.
Yeah, now I spoke with Bridie about something along this line as well, when he sort of moved.
He was my first mentor.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that he would probably say he realized or stung him to was realizing he didn't have control of his own business in the sense of his venue. And so he really wanted to have control of that aspect.
Yes.
And it sounds like you've had a similar experience where you build up a business, you build up a clientele, it's associated with a particular venue. And then I don't know your story, but something happened where you said you got kicked out. So
yep.
What did you learn from that process?
Okay, so I started in a medical center, and starting in a medical center is low risk, but it's rarely where many owners want to end up, Doug. So basically, the support I had in the first 2 or 3 years by the doctor's referrals really grew my business. But there's a little thing called a landlord, and it might depend how rational one's landlord is. So I started on a lease at $500 a month. And then the lady doctor sold to a male doctor. He was my new landlord. It went to $700 a month, $1,000, $1,500, $2,000, and I decided to leave when he was bumping my 30 square meter space to $4,000 a month, which I actually had a conversation with someone about this the other day. 15 years later, that's actually twice Brisbane inner city market value rent in like the best towers there. So what happened was he had that conversation. I'm like, I just didn't do anything. And then I went and found my first premises to buy, where I was for 5 years. And then 10 years ago now, we bought the reasonable sized clinic we're in now. And I suppose while it can stretch you at the time, I've found that, our business is 20 staff. 6 physios, 4 massage, 2 psychologists, a Pilates instructor, practice manager, and a team of admin. And owning the premises is a very helpful thing, Doug, because I pay no rent, and that gives me a little bit of extra money to play with to reimburse my team and to, reward them in different ways and to incentivize them and basically run a business where my team are at the center of what I do.
Yeah. So when you've moved clinically, I guess, into a practice, what do you think is more important for young physios listening to this and they're sort of having some thoughts along the lines of going towards business themselves? How important is the clinical side and how important is the business side?
That's a really good question. I suppose I might answer it by talking about what I would have done if I had my time again. So if I could have done this process again, what would have been better than what I did? And by better, I wanted an accelerated clinical journey and an accelerated business journey. And what I missed in that first 5 years was a mentor. And as I said, I did a lot of courses, but I didn't have a mentor. So like if I could take my 40-year-old brain, put it in 21-year-old Nick's head, I would have gone to probably 10 private practices in a region that I think I wanted to be or end up, met the owners of each of those, asked to shadow the owners for half a day or a day, seen who I wanted to learn from, and found myself a mentor to work under to learn physio and business for anywhere from 2 to 5 years. And at some stage during that 2 to 5 years, talk to the owner about what a succession plan might look like, which might look like buying into the clinic, might look like starting my own with their support. Back to your original question, Doug, what's more important, clinical or business? Without business skills, your clinic doesn't work. But without getting results for clients, your reputation and your results won't allow you to thrive or won't allow you to sleep at night, I suppose. Like, if you're you've lived in the era of people, doing freaking 10 sessions of interferential with every new patient that comes through the door. I remember starting my career, there was such a variety in quality of physio. And I think I do believe that quality has improved over time as an average. Where like I thrived because there was one practice where everyone got ultrasound and heat packs. And there was another practice where, everyone was a fresh graduate. So I made my way pretty well at the start just by getting more experienced, laying my hands on people, developing that good, we'll call it now motivational interviewing, therapeutic alliance, basically plotting out a good consultation where you understand the main reason why someone is here to see you. You have an ability to work your way towards a provisional diagnosis, which you can meaningfully convey to them. The treatment is a mix of hands-on and exercise and self-management, and you have a plan for that person. So I would say they have reasonably equal importance, Doug, but there are ways for young physios to learn that stuff from people like me or you that is almost always better than just starting it on your own.
Yeah. Okay. I was thinking that there is a transition from, I guess you call it a worker bee to a queen bee, in the sense that you're taking on more of a management role, more of a, a buy-in role, a business role. But even with new graduates, I find it an interesting conversation to sort of say that, at some point you're going to ask for a pay rise, and that's fair enough. But the business owner can't give you a pay rise unless you're earning more for the business, because otherwise the business is going backwards. And if a business goes backwards, it goes broke and you don't have a job at all. So essentially, as a new grad, recent grad working with somebody else, you kind of have to think of yourself as a business within a business. Like if you generate more clients, you increase the throughput, you develop some classes, you can then go to your boss and say, hey, look, in the last 6 months, this is how I've built my caseload, and this is how your business, the owner's business, has improved. How about we do a bit of an equity share here, and what about a pay rise? And as a business owner, that to me, yeah, absolutely, because I want you to
Music to
stay
my ears,
inspired and
Doug.
motivated. But they've got to realize, that a business can't pay somebody more unless the business is doing better because of what they bring to it. So profitability and productivity, then we can pay you more. And it's not like in the hospital, you another year, you get a pay rise. Well, private practice, it doesn't work like that, does it?
So, Doug, I find that there's two types of therapists in private practice from the perspective you're referring to. Those that understand how private practice works and those that don't understand. And there's a surprisingly high proportion of those that don't understand, but I won't talk about them in this segment here. So the ones that do understand, there's this concept that we discuss in my circles, which is a therapist can only be paid from the pool of money that they generate, because there are no externally generated pools of money in a private business. The way that business works in physiotherapy is physios bring in money. From that money is paid the expenses of the business, the wages and benefits of the therapist, and profit is left over. Better businesses don't leave over profit, they plan for it, but we won't go into that. So the conversation you just described is generally facilitated by an owner in a non-threatening way, introducing the concepts that I described to a therapist reasonably early on. And sometimes if a therapist doesn't want to think in terms of revenue, they can think in terms of patient numbers, which they're generally a bit more au fait with. And you're right that therapists have different goals when they start. Like, some are just hell-bent on learning as much as possible. Some do want money. Some want freedom and autonomy. Some want to be recognized. Some want positions of responsibility. People that I work with are developing more psychometric tools to help us as owners, Doug, determine which of those pathways somebody wants. But I want my therapist coming to me having the conversations that you just described, because it means that they have demonstrated this understanding between either I need to either see more clients or I need to get better so I can charge more, or I want to develop these novel services and streams. Or the first thing that young therapists need to do, Doug, is just plug their gaps. So like if you're a young therapist and you see a client 2 or 3 times and they don't come back, call them, find out why they haven't come back. Almost always, it's actually nothing to do with you. My dog died, my freaking battery died on my car, or my kids got sick, or I got COVID. One of the biggest problems that young physios face is they think that the person doesn't come back because of something they've done wrong and it affects their confidence. 9 out of 10 times it's not. But back to the financial side, I want to be giving my therapist pay rises as often as they can sort of demonstrate those results. But until they understand it, Doug, they can't easily demonstrate that. So much of that falls on me and the other owners here.
Yeah. When you're helping new and recent graduates develop themselves as clinicians, or as physios, I guess, more broadly, what are the common kind of clinical and personal and business type advice you find yourself saying time and time again? Like, what are the key things that you tend to mention to them?
I love that. Okay, so to answer that, I'm going to think about what the average problems are. So like at the root of it, so I'll describe what I think is a root problem a young physio has that limits their performance and growth and happiness in their first few years of their career. Because the physio is inexperienced, they don't perceive that they're offering the level of value to a client as, say, a 5 or 10 or even a 3rd-year experienced therapist. And that young therapist then compares themselves with the more experienced therapist. So what are some of the symptoms of not perceiving that you're offering value? I find the main one is what I refer to a lot as projection. So if a 21-year-old physio who's never had an injury sees a 60-year-old professional who has a sore knee and they're either facing a knee replacement or giving up golf or never being able to take an overseas holiday, it's very hard for that 21-year-old to truly understand and empathize with the impact and magnitude of the problem that the 60-year-old is bringing to them. That's very difficult, isn't it, Doug? It's one of the hardest things. Now, that lack of understanding and the fact that that therapist is inexperienced and doesn't know what the potential natural history or prognosis for that condition is, whether that person may A, need a knee replacement, B, get one without needing one, C, get worse, D, develop psychological issues because of this problem, E, have a really good recovery guided by the therapist. Without being able to understand that those pathways are all possible, I suppose I would just call it overwhelm. I think the first few years are very overwhelming because all of your clients are new. You know, when you've been doing it as long as you and I, Doug, you got people you've seen for 20 years on and off, and you know them. You don't have to build that rapport, and you know how to motivate them and what they need. But yeah, start of your career, you don't believe you're providing value. Everyone's new. You're comparing yourself with more experienced therapists. And frankly, there are clients that you're not going to get good results with. Like I remember, I think I had like my first CRPS patient a month after starting the clinic, Doug. And how the hell do you think that's going to go? Like I did my best. I researched the condition. Back then it was called reflex sympathetic dystrophy. So young physios, expect the hard patients to sort of emerge at the start of your career, Doug. You've probably got a story like that as well. And when you look back, I did my best, but there's no doubt that that person would have got a better outcome seeing me now than back then. But to a degree, you can't beat yourself up about this. Like it's the past is in the past. And so the most common thing I see with these young therapists is this belief that they're not providing enough value for what the person is paying. Like at our clinic, we had a new graduate last year who moved cities, and you know he was charging $150 for an initial consultation. And I had to say to him, Doug, think about what you are providing. Like you probably listen to this client better than an experienced therapist. Like I was treating until mid last year, but I was distracted and my appointments were shorter. This person had more desire to help that person and they had fewer distractions. So the young therapist, you really got to think about the fact that there are some things that you're probably doing better than a therapist of my stage. Like I've had young kids and I've had consults where I'm freaking falling asleep because the kids have been sick, you know, stresses with the business during COVID. You know, young therapists, you guys provide more than you think you do, honestly. Sorry, Doug, I was ranting a bit there.
No, it's all insights. What would you say is the hardest lesson that you've learned as a physio? Like you've taken some quick pivots earlier than I would have normally advised the physio. So that's fine. You've survived. You've still got hair in your head, and that's good.
Yeah.
So what would you say has been your hardest lesson you've learnt in your career so far?
Oh, wow. As a therapist?
Well, if you want, I mean, you have a big business process component to your makeup.
Yeah.
So if you want to have one either way, we'll give you a.
Yeah, okay. The business one's easy and I won't elaborate on. The biggest mistake I made in business is being on my own by myself for too long, which was 5 years. And I can talk about that at some later stage. As a therapist, I've just got to try and differentiate it because there'd probably a few. Biggest learning, biggest mistake. Yeah, I would say not getting myself under a good mentor soon enough. So again, in that first 5 years, like I don't think I did damage, but I think I sold some people short for what I could have done for them. Funny example, Doug, I was at a restaurant a year ago. This guy came up to me and shook my hand. I'm like, who are you? I didn't say that to him, but that's what I was thinking. He said, oh, Nick, I saw you back in 2004. You said you couldn't help me and you referred me to the chiropractor. And I've been going twice a week ever since for the last 15 years. I'm like, oh, what have I done? So, yeah, like I think that as a physio, like physio is a very adaptable profession where the therapist that you become and the business owner you become, should you choose to, are exactly what you can make of it. You don't need to follow someone's pathway to the T. What I did, both therapy and business-wise, between probably 2007 and 2015, was find 3 or 4 mentors who I believed in for both business and therapy, that I built a method that was based on the best parts of what I learned from those mentors. And if there was something that I didn't like that they did, I just didn't do it. So, you know, I've lived a life where, because I was under mentored for the first few years, I probably overcompensated, Doug, and become over mentored for the rest of my career. Yeah.
And for a couple of shorty questions, maybe. For a couple $100, what would you say has been your best investment? Either a book or an app or a session or something that's assisted you in your development?
It's evolved so much, Doug, and I liked this question when I saw it asked. And guess what? I can save your listeners $200. There are now these things called Facebook groups, and they are absolutely incredible because they are forums of people similar to you. So there are clinical groups, there are business groups. So, like, I run a business group with 1,600 Aussie physio clinic owners on it, but I'm part of 4 or 5 different clinical groups where people ask questions and other people in the group answer those questions. Now, I think that format is more valuable than any passive tool like a book, an online course. I think the interactivity, legacy, and there's one thing that people don't use enough in these groups, Doug. That's the search function. There's this little magnifying glass in the top right. Like if you want to know about a certain condition, like I just mentioned CRPS, if you're on like the APA Musculoskeletal Physio Australia group, that thing's been going for 6 years. Go and type in CRPS and look at what everyone said about it before, look at what references they've given, look at how experienced therapists treat it. Same from a business perspective. If it's like, do I have to pay superannuation on this type of bonus, just freaking type that into the search bar. So I'm a member of probably 10 of these groups, Doug. I'm interactive in probably half of them, and I facilitate and chair 2 of them. And the feedback we get on the free education and the gaps that we solve for people, it's like nothing that existed before these forums. Like they're remarkable. They really are.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to a couple of things. One is the first, that we are so, or can be so, in the present, and so we only scroll down the first 2 or 3 things and think, okay, yeah, I've got on contact, but they don't realize, as you say, there's literally a blog of archival stuff there that if they hit the search button, it's the same. And on our blog that I've got, probably 15 years of stuff, and people ask me a question and say, look, if you just went to typed in the search, pregnancy and dry needling, you'll find probably 3 or 4 articles.
100%.
And it's an interesting thing. Just keep reminding you there is an archival amount of material that can be quite handy on that particular topic. It doesn't have to be there in the last couple of weeks.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes these groups like modern evolving encyclopedias or Wikipedias for the younger people listening to this or watching this podcast, is that everything you need is there. You've just got to learn how to navigate the system. Because again, who read an encyclopedia from start to finish, Doug? You got to know what you're looking for. You could probably see I wasn't that diligent to do that. I just went to what I needed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and those sort of groups or forums are so niche and targeted. So if you're in your right niche, yeah, the information you're getting is quite specific also to what you're sort of looking for.
Oh, it is. And the best way to learn from people is not to reinvent the wheel. It's find someone that's a couple of years ahead of you, that's done what you want to do, and follow what they do. It's not rocket science.
Yeah. And it's the same with the patients. So say, look, we don't live in the age of information now. That's come and gone. We live in the age of synthesis. So you wanting to find a practitioner or a person or a mentor that's been there, done that, and then can filter out the 99 articles and give you the one that you actually need. And that's a good clinician as well.
Yep. And I think that sometimes, like, you describe it better than me. Like, I'd call it experience, you call it synthesis, which sounds better. But determining the validity of that is difficult. And yeah, do not underrate experience and expertise in terms of helping you to get where you need to in your career, whether it be physio, business, whatever. Yeah, honestly, it's how I've made my way.
Now, you gave us one out on the limb decision, which was to buy a practice from a piece of paper on the wall after walking out of a job interview. Is there another one that you've made in regards to your career, and what was the outcome of it?
Yeah, good question, Doug. Probably the other one was in around 2015, 2016. Once I was getting bored, but I felt like there was something more that I needed to both do and be in my life and for the profession. And I was, at the time, my identity was a therapist. I was looking after a lot of people, and a business owner. I was growing a business, looking after team. But there was just this something extra, and I was like, what is it? And what I started doing, Doug, was I started a Facebook page and group, and I called it Ultimate Physio. And I started talking about concepts that were affecting the profession or the area of private practice physiotherapy in Australia. And I shot a lot of videos, Doug, and I didn't really know who I was talking to. I was unsure at that time in 2016 whether I was talking to therapists or owners. And what started to happen is I started to get a lot of engagement from owners. And so while I have produced resources for therapists, so my business, Ultimate Physio, is a consulting business that works with clinic owners to give them time, profit, and freedom through business leadership and personal development resources. So I know that's a rehearsed spiel, but so be it. It's probably the easiest way to describe what I do. And so to go out on a limb was me creating this consulting business without knowing who my market was. And I basically put a year into it, Doug. I thought I'll give this a year. I'm satisfied to not earn a cent for a year to see if I can create something and to see if what I'm saying is being received by anyone and whether it's worth me talking to people. And the community that we built has just the tightness of the relationships in that community and the help that people give each other has proven to me that I did the right thing. And like my life now is split between my family, my 2 clinics. I started another one 6 weeks ago, and this consulting business where I deliver like a 9-month business educational program to a group of clinic owners. So that was the other limb, because when you get to a certain stage of life, Doug, anything that takes a large block of your time, one needs to very carefully consider to not have too many spinning plates in the air at once. But I'm very glad I did, because basically I've got these clinics and I've got this consulting business, and the relevance of what's happening in my clinics feeds this, and the great ideas that everyone comes up with here comes back to the clinics. Like, it's this symbiotic relationship that I would have never thought possible. So yeah, it was not a risk on anything apart from my time, which is very valuable, as yours is, and everyone listening to this. And yeah, I feel like it's paid off as well.
Yeah. What 3 things in your professional life stand out for you as being highlights, either high or low, I guess?
Okay, so highlights. Yeah, that decision, that initial decision to go all in, the GFC and my response to that. So going all in on business and becoming a better physio based on some pain. And probably the third one is last year. So last year, 2022, is fairly widely amongst the clinic owners that I work with known as what was our hardest year of business ever. Obviously, it was a year COVID was let loose in Australia. There was significant challenges associated with the mental health of our team and the viability of our businesses based on significant volumes of cancelled appointments and therapists' lack of availability due to sickness. I lost 15 of my 20 team last year, and I rebuilt the team. So that's probably actually my proudest thing that I've ever done, is rebuild a team that was crumbling last year due to many factors. Probably the predominant one, Doug, would be the COVID soup that we were all sort of swimming in, and what that was doing to our mental health as a collective. So yeah, those 3 things, they're all pretty big things, I reckon.
Mm. If you could send yourself back in time to your younger self, stepping out of that sort of job interview, I guess, and impart 3 pieces of wisdom, what would they be?
Probably only need to impart one, really, which is just to be more patient. So I think what I believe, Doug, is that at the start of my career, I was rushing. Everything was fast. Everything was to get to somewhere. And that was in business, that was clinically. Sometimes if you don't step back to think about where you want to go and learn more about who you are and what you want, you rush. But it's like not setting your GPS, and you get in your car, Doug, and you start it in about half a second and you drive as fast as you can, but you don't know where you're going. And then what happens is after an hour of driving, you're like, where am I? I'm in the forest somewhere, but I wanted to go to the beach. So I think that being patient and spending time thinking about, as I said, who you are, what you want, what's stopping you, how to get what you want. So patience, thinking time, And we've talked about it a couple of times, advice from people that are 2 to 3 years ahead of you. I think if you get advice, like I like the concept of Physio+10. I personally found for myself, if someone was 10 years ahead, I couldn't realistically see how I was going to get there. I thought that was potentially too big a step. On reflection, for me, that 2 to 3, it's like, oh, well, you're 3 years ahead. It's like the graduate learning from a fourth year. I think it's easier for a graduate to learn from a fourth year at physio than a 10 or a 20, because the 10 or the 20 sometimes loses perspective of what it's like to actually be a graduate, which is why in my clinic I have these stepped mentoring structures, and I'm not doing the clinical mentoring because I'm 20 years out and I'm not a dinosaur, but I don't have the empathy for the younger ones that someone 2 or 3 years older does. So yeah, patience, thinking time, mentorship, 3 things.
I think that's the nature of youth, though, isn't it? I love the energy, and that's the thing I love when I go and do some teaching. They have so much energy,
100%.
and that in itself is quite a refreshing quality. That when you interact with it, it sort of enthuses other people too, which I think is great. And then, as you say, the directing is good. We could probably be a bit more strategic, perhaps, when we're younger. If we know what we're wanting to do, then we can get there a little bit quicker. And I like the analogy of having a map. It's much easier to get from A to B if you've got a map, GPS. There's an age thing. You'd be using GPS and I'd be using a map and compass. But yeah, I think that the combination of the two, the youth energy and the older wisdom, strategic planning, and the benefits of it, it's a good combination. That's what you say, put under umbrella of mentorship.
It's a great team. And one of my favorite analogies I've heard, Doug, is you got youth, middle age, old age, 3 variables: time, energy, and money. When you're young, you got time and energy, but not money. So what do you want? You want money. In middle age, you still have energy and you've got money, but what don't you have, Doug? Time. That's what people like you and I crave. And then the older person, remember this as therapists, they have money, they have time, they don't have energy. They're coming to you to help them get their energy and their vitality back. That's what they want from you. But how can you understand that as a 21-year-old when you got energy in spades?
Yeah, I've always said the government needs to pay more when you're younger because you need the money, and they tax you harder when you're older because you don't need the money.
Well, it's more correct than the system we have, isn't it?
Looking forward, where would you sort of like to see our profession of physiotherapy heading in the next few years?
My vision for physio as a service itself, I thought about this for many years, Doug, and I tried to come up with a couple of things. I think the most clear thing that I could come up with is it's said that every individual has a doctor and every individual has a pharmacist. I would love every person in Australia to have their physio and to have their physio's number saved in their phone. Obviously, there's a lot of work being done behind the scenes now to, I'll say it, remove GPs as the gatekeepers of neuromusculoskeletal medicine. I believe in 10 or 20 years, physios can be seen on an equal level to GPs, but physios are neuromusculoskeletal first contact experts, and every single person has a physio that they see. I think that many of our profession's challenges and problems will be solved by that, Doug. I'd say the main rod we've created for our own back is undervaluing what we do as a profession. And I think that the flipping of that system and some concurrent education from people like you and myself and people with influence in the profession to those less experienced than us can probably help to shift our identities to be able to take that mantle. So that's what I want. I want every person to have a physio.
Yeah. Well, no arguments from me there in the sense that I think that, the gateway is skewed in a direction which is not beneficial for the system or the finances of the system.
Yep.
And that certainly
or the user.
Yeah, well, that's the point behind the system, isn't it? It's to benefit that person. So yeah, if you ask, the question would be if a person comes in with a workers' comp injury that hurt their back, or they're an athlete that's rolled their ankle and they got to claim insurance. It's crazy to be going to the GP because you just wasted an appointment, you've wasted consultation, you've wasted time of a profession that really is time poor anyway, and could be better utilized. So to me, it's more a recognition of the better utilization of resources, which are finite. But at the same time, we have to step up. I think the RACGP as a medical profession also has to realize and acknowledge that they aren't the best people for that particular type of consultation. And until the two parties come to a recognition, because that's where Medicare comes in. We've got this big review of Medicare, but if the medical profession is fighting tooth and nail to say, no, we don't want any other profession on the Medicare schedule, well, it's a user which is missing out, and it's a taxpayer which is paying unnecessarily for services which aren't optimally provided.
I think RACGP has to realise that if they gave us that responsibility, it will actually make their members' lives better, not worse, in many ways.
Yeah. Well, and as you know, as a business owner, it's all about showing possibilities, potentials, benefits, and that's to both parties. And I think, we need to put out a positive benefits case to the medical profession, how it would benefit them and their other clients to utilize our services to a high degree.
100%. We've got to show them how it's good for them, Doug, not bad, don't we?
It's the benefits we've got to look, the half glass full thing.
Mm.
So where do you see yourself focusing, Nick, in the next few years? What are your sort of goals for the next few years going ahead?
So I'm starting to feel now like I did 6 years ago, Doug. I'm starting to feel like I've got this extra thing in me. I'm not sure what it is. So I'm at the stage where my goal with my clinics is to hire as many people as I can in my local region, but I'm big on creating tiers of leadership below me. So it reduces my responsibility. I still have leadership and influence, but not day-to-day responsibility to buy me time. I want a bit more time to do things that I haven't done enough of in the last 20 years. Like we've just bought a unit on the Gold Coast. You're probably a surfer, being a West Australian. I need to learn how to surf properly because I'm not that good, and my wife is. She's better than me. I want to be involved in the coaching of my kids in whatever they do. Professionally, I would like to take more people through my Ultimate Physio program, but I just feel like I've got this one more business in me that's sort of sitting above Ultimate Physio from an impact perspective, and I don't yet know what that looks like. It may not be even relating to physio. Like, I'll go very deep with you. So I'm a driven business bloke, and too many of my friends who are driven business blokes are getting divorced. And I did a program a year ago to help driven businessmen not end up with divorced homes. So that's something I'm extremely passionate about, because what's the use of doing this all if you become so driven that you fail to be fulfilled with what's around you, Doug, and you're just seeking achievement the whole time. So you asked, I had to tell you. So
well, I mean, maybe that's the business. Maybe it's, because essentially when you look back on the business of physiotherapy, we've come as clinicians. Some of us have migrated to be business owners. Some of us have realized a deficiency, and we've gone out and sought external information from other sources on how to run a business, because it's completely separate to being a clinician.
Yes.
So maybe you're talking about one step further than that. So saying, well, now we've got the clinician, we've got the business owner, but we've also now got an issue where the person's out of balance in their life skills.
Yes.
Maybe that's what we need to bring back into our profession. Say, you can have your life, you can have your business, but you also need to be careful of your family and those other things that are close to your doorstep as well. Maybe that's what it is.
I've actually heard, Doug, that in business, and once you reach a level where you're solving bigger problems, it's often said your ideal client is you. So like, I think that what I've found at every stage of my career, that as I level up, my ideas focus on what I actually need for myself and helping other people who are going through similar. So, at this stage of COVID, we're trying to solve structural challenges in our profession, but I really do want to look after the mental health and lifestyle of the people that I serve who are clinic owners in Australia. So that's what I'm very passionate about, and I'll help them solve those problems in whatever way I can.
All right. Well, thanks very much for your insights and time, Nick. It's been a real pleasure. I'm sure people listening to this podcast on Physio+10 are going to pull out some real gems, and it's all because of you. So thanks again.
I appreciate it, Doug. And thank you so much for listening if you've made it this far. And feel free to contact me if you've got any questions. No obligation, no charge. Just look me up on Facebook, Nicholas Schuster, and just message me and ask me something. Happy to help.
Cheers, Nick.
Thank you, Doug.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Physio+10, in which I trust you gained some valuable insights. It'd be awesome if you could leave your 2 cents worth as a review or rating of this podcast, and I look forward to sharing the story of another trailblazing physiotherapist with you in 2 weeks' time. Stay safe